Inside death row, the untold lives of guards who face death daily. Death row is not just a prison. It's a place where every day is a battle for survival, not just for the inmates but for the guards who walk these halls. Imagine spending your career staring at death, knowing that at any moment someone's life could end, and it's your job to make sure it happens safely. This is what it's really like to be a death row guard.
If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content.
Death row is a world defined by routine, precision, and constant vigilance. The day begins early, often before the sun rises, with correctional officers preparing for hours of intense focus. Every movement is calculated, every step measured, because even a small lapse can have serious consequences. Guards like Mike Begley, who spent decades at San Quentin, describe it as a life where vigilance never sleeps, even in the quietest moments. You can't ever relax, he says. Even when it's quiet, you know that something can go wrong in an instant. The first task of the day is a cell check. Officers walk the long, narrow corridors of death row, peering into each cell, ensuring that every lock, every fixture, and every inmate is accounted for. The metal doors creak under the weight of constant use, and the cold, harsh light of the fluorescent bulbs casts long shadows across the floors. Anonymous guards have described these walks as a strange mix of monotony and tension. One recalled, "You do the same check every day, but you never stop thinking about what might happen if something's missed." Each inspection requires a trained eye, noting anything unusual, an object out of place, a hidden item, or an inmate behaving differently. Once the cells are secure, attention shifts to feeding and escorting prisoners. Meals are delivered on trays, often through the metal slots of cell doors, with strict protocols to prevent contraband or incidents. Guards must move calmly but decisively, ensuring that each prisoner receives their allotted food while maintaining control of the environment. Escorting inmates to and from recreation yards, medical appointments, or administrative meetings is another task that demands precision. Guards operate under strict formations, with multiple officers assigned to prevent escape attempts or confrontations. Even a simple walk down the hall requires careful positioning, awareness of blind spots, and constant communication. Maintaining security and order goes beyond physical supervision. Officers monitor surveillance cameras, track movement, and enforce rules designed to prevent violence or unrest. It's a high-stakes environment where one small oversight can escalate into a dangerous situation. Mike Begley explains, "You're always balancing the rules of the prison with the humanity of the people inside. It's not just about control, it's about managing a delicate tension every single day." Guards must remain alert, ready to respond instantly to emergencies ranging from fights to medical crises. Despite the routine nature of these tasks, the job is far from monotonous. Every day brings new challenges and subtle shifts in the atmosphere of the cell block. Guards note changes in inmate behavior, unexpected confrontations, and moments that test both patience and judgment. The physical layout of the prison itself adds to the stress. Long hallways, narrow corridors, and heavy metal doors create an environment that feels both confining and charged with tension. Even routine patrols are exercises in awareness and mental stamina. The psychological demands are just as heavy as the physical ones. Anonymous guards have often emphasized that the mental strain comes from the combination of repetitive tasks and the constant awareness of danger. One guard said, "You walk these halls hundreds of times a week, but you never get used to it. You're always aware of the stakes. Everybody in here is capable of violence, and the mistakes are unforgiving." The routines, feeding, checking, patrolling, are simple in concept, but in practice they require vigilance, discipline, and the ability to respond calmly under pressure. The day ends much as it began, with checks, shifts of observation, and careful monitoring. While some might assume that routine brings comfort, guards know that the monotony is deceptive. In a world where every day could bring a crisis, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, and the line between routine and danger is razor thin. In the words of Mike Begley, "It's a job that tests everything about you, your patience, your courage, and your humanity." Working on death row carries a psychological weight unlike any other assignment in corrections. The environment itself contributes to the strain. Long, silent corridors, constant isolation, and the unspoken knowledge that many of the men housed there are waiting to die. Guards operate in a space where time feels suspended, marked not by progress or rehabilitation, but by appeals, execution dates, and uncertainty. Over time, this atmosphere begins to affect even the most experienced officers. Former prison superintendent Frank Thompson, who oversaw executions and spent years inside correctional institutions, has spoken openly about the emotional consequences for staff. He described how officers are trained to maintain professionalism, but no amount of preparation fully shields them from the reality of participating in a system designed to end a life. According to Thompson, many officers experience lingering guilt, anxiety, and emotional numbness after executions, even when they believe they are simply doing their jobs. He noted that the process creates what he called additional victims, referring not only to inmates and their families, but to the correctional staff required to carry out the state's final orders. The strain does not come only from executions themselves. Guards spend years supervising inmates who may eventually be put to death, forming routine working relationships that complicate emotional boundaries. Officers see inmates age, suffer illness, lose family members, and confront their own mortality. Even when personal distance is maintained, the human presence is unavoidable. Frank Thompson observed that some of the most disciplined, rule-following prisoners he encountered were on death row, a fact that often deepened the emotional conflict for officers tasked with enforcing an irreversible punishment. The psychological toll frequently manifests in subtle ways. Guards report difficulty sleeping, heightened alertness even while off duty, and a persistent sense of tension that follows them home. The job requires constant readiness for violence or crisis, and over time this vigilance becomes internalized. Officers describe replaying shifts in their minds, second-guessing routine decisions, and carrying the stress of the environment long after the workday ends. For some, the silence of death row is more unsettling than noise. The absence of activity, combined with the awareness of execution schedules, creates an atmosphere of prolonged anticipation. Executions intensify these pressures. Frank Thompson recalled that participation in executions often left officers emotionally shaken, regardless of their personal views on capital punishment. He described how the procedural nature of executions, checklists, protocols, and strict timing, can create a sense of detachment during the event, followed by emotional fallout afterward. Officers involved in execution teams have reported intrusive memories, emotional withdrawal, and difficulty discussing their experiences, even with colleagues. Thompson emphasized that many officers are discouraged from openly expressing distress, reinforcing a culture of silence around mental health. The physical environment of death row mirrors this emotional isolation. Empty cells, dim lighting, and narrow hallways contribute to a sense of confinement not just for inmates, but for staff as well. Clocks become symbols of waiting, counting down hours, days, and years. Guards walk the same routes repeatedly, past doors that may one day open for the final time. The repetition reinforces the awareness that time on death row does not lead forward, only closer to an end. Music is often absent in these spaces, leaving officers alone with their thoughts. The lack of normal prison noise amplifies internal tension. Thompson noted that many officers struggle most in the quiet moments, when there is nothing to distract from the reality of the work. Over time, some officers request transfers away from death row, not because of fear but because of emotional exhaustion. Despite training and experience, the psychological toll remains cumulative. Frank Thompson has stated that the long-term mental impact on correctional officers is rarely acknowledged publicly, even though it shapes careers, personal relationships, and beliefs. For many guards, death row is not just a workplace, but a mental burden carried long after the uniform comes off. Executions represent the most emotionally demanding aspect of death row work, even for officers who have spent years inside maximum security environments. While only a small number of correctional staff directly participate in executions, the impact extends far beyond the execution chamber. Preparations often begin days in advance, altering the atmosphere of the entire unit. Schedules tighten, procedures multiply, and tension becomes palpable throughout the facility. Frank Thompson, a former prison superintendent who oversaw executions, described the process as highly controlled yet emotionally destabilizing for staff. Every action is governed by protocol, from inmate movement to room preparation and staff positioning. Officers are trained to treat the execution as a professional obligation, but Thompson emphasized that emotional detachment is rarely complete. Even those who believe in the justice system struggle with the weight of finality. The knowledge that a routine shift may end with a life deliberately taken creates a level of stress that is difficult to articulate. In the hours leading up to an execution, officers assigned to death row often notice changes in inmate behavior. Some prisoners become withdrawn, others unusually calm. Guards maintain strict professionalism, limiting interaction and following orders precisely. Despite this, the emotional reality remains unavoidable. Officers are acutely aware that the person they are escorting, monitoring, or guarding will not return to their cell. Thompson noted that these moments challenge the emotional boundaries officers are trained to uphold. For execution team members, the experience does not end when the procedure concludes. Thompson described how staff often return to their posts immediately afterward, expected to resume normal duties. There is rarely formal decompression time. Many officers suppress their reactions, believing that expressing distress signals weakness. Over time, this suppression can lead to emotional fatigue, sleep disturbances, and difficulty processing the experience. Thompson recalled that several officers he worked with carried the effects of executions long after leaving the profession. The psychological impact varies, but common responses include intrusive memories, emotional withdrawal, and heightened anxiety. Some officers report replaying specific moments repeatedly in their minds, while others experience numbness or detachment from their surroundings. Thompson explained that executions can fundamentally alter how officers perceive their work, their authority, and the justice system itself. For some, it strengthens their belief in procedure and order. For others, it raises unresolved moral questions. The secrecy surrounding executions compounds these effects. Officers are often prohibited from discussing details outside official channels, limiting opportunities for emotional support. Even within the prison, conversations about executions are typically brief and restrained. Thompson observed that this silence isolates staff, reinforcing the idea that they must bear the emotional consequences alone. The execution chamber may be physically separate from death row, but its presence is felt throughout the institution. Executions also affect officers who are not directly involved. Guards assigned to perimeter security, transportation, or control rooms remain on heightened alert throughout the process. Routine operations are disrupted, reinforcing the sense that something irreversible is occurring. The entire prison shifts into a state of controlled tension, one that lingers even after the execution is complete. Thompson emphasized that repeated exposure intensifies the toll. Officers who witness multiple executions often describe cumulative emotional strain rather than isolated reactions. Over time, some request reassignment, while others leave corrections altogether. The decision is rarely about fear, it is about emotional endurance. Thompson has stated that the long-term mental health effects on correctional staff are insufficiently acknowledged in public discussions of capital punishment. Executions are often described as clinical and procedural, but for the officers involved, they remain deeply human experiences. The emotional burden does not end with the closing of a door or the completion of paperwork. For many guards, execution day becomes a memory that defines their career, reshaping how they view authority, responsibility, and the cost of enforcing the law. Much of what is known about life on death row comes not from official statements, but from anonymous correctional officers who have spoken publicly about their experiences after leaving the job. One such former guard, who worked in a facility with a death row unit in Georgia, described the assignment as stripped down to its most basic and demanding elements. According to his account, death row work was less about rehabilitation and more about containment, observation, and preparation for irreversible outcomes. The guard explained that daily responsibilities included segregation patrols, constant observation, and what officers referred to as death watches, in the days or hours leading up to a scheduled execution. During these periods, inmates were monitored closely for self-harm, medical emergencies, or disruptions. Officers rotated shifts to ensure uninterrupted supervision, often remaining alert for extended hours. The atmosphere during death watches was described as tense and quiet, with staff aware that a single incident could delay or complicate the execution process. One of the most striking aspects of the job, according to the guard, was the lack of weapons. Death row officers were often unarmed, relying instead on training, positioning, and teamwork to maintain control. This reality became especially stressful when officers found themselves outnumbered, responsible for supervising inmates who were classified as extremely dangerous. The guard emphasized that physical force was considered a last resort, and that maintaining calm authority was essential for personal safety. Despite limited interaction, the guard acknowledged that officers inevitably formed impressions of inmates. Conversations were minimal and regulated, yet patterns emerged over time. Some inmates remained withdrawn and silent. Others spoke calmly or attempted small talk during routine checks. The guard noted that while emotional distance was encouraged, complete detachment was difficult to maintain after years of repeated exposure. Officers learned inmates' habits, moods and behavioral cues, which became essential for anticipating potential problems. The unpredictability of death row was a constant source of stress. The guard recalled incidents where routine duties escalated suddenly, including near attacks that were narrowly prevented through quick response and coordination. Even during seemingly quiet shifts, officers remained alert for sudden movements, improvised weapons, or attempts to provoke confrontation. According to the guard, complacency was one of the greatest dangers on death row, as long periods of calm could be followed by moments of extreme volatility. The guard also shared observations about inmate behavior surrounding last meals and final days. Some inmates treated last meals as ordinary, requesting simple foods, while others declined them entirely. Officers were required to follow strict procedures, documenting requests and ensuring compliance with policy. These moments, though procedural, were emotionally charged. The guard described them as reminders that routine tasks were connected to life-ending consequences. Inmates' behavior in their final days varied widely. Some appeared resigned and calm, others showed visible anxiety or emotional withdrawal. Officers were trained to observe without engaging, yet the atmosphere was difficult to ignore. The guard noted that even experienced staff felt the shift in tone across the unit as execution dates approached. The silence became heavier and the weight of responsibility more pronounced. The anonymous nature of these accounts highlights an important reality. Many correctional officers choose not to attach their names to these experiences. Fear of professional stigma, legal constraints, and cultural expectations within corrections discourage open discussion. Yet these testimonies align closely with documented patterns observed across death row facilities nationwide. While these accounts are personal and self-reported, they provide insight into the lived reality of death row work. The guard's experience reflects a role defined by vigilance, restraint, and emotional endurance. It is a job marked not only by danger, but by the psychological complexity of enforcing final decisions within a rigid system. For those who have walked these corridors, death row is remembered not as a place of constant violence, but as an environment where unpredictability and emotional strain coexist with routine and control. Ron McAndrew served as a prison warden in Florida and Texas, overseeing executions and managing staff responsible for carrying out the most final act of the justice system. Unlike many former officials, McAndrew later chose to speak publicly about the psychological effects executions had on correctional staff, including himself. His perspective carries particular weight because it comes from a leadership position, one responsible not only for procedures, but for the well-being of the officers under his command. McAndrew described executions as events that leave lasting mental impressions, regardless of how routine they appear on paper. He explained that wardens and officers are expected to maintain control, composure, and authority throughout the process, yet those expectations often clash with human reactions. According to McAndrew, witnessing executions, especially those that did not go as planned, led to recurring nightmares, emotional distress, and long-term trauma among staff. These effects were not isolated incidents but patterns observed across multiple facilities and execution teams. He noted that even executions carried out according to protocol could be deeply disturbing. The procedural nature of the event does not lessen its emotional impact. Officers must remain present, attentive, and compliant with strict timelines, knowing that their actions contribute directly to the end of a human life. McAndrew emphasized that many officers struggled with this responsibility long after the execution ended, replaying events in their minds and questioning their role within the system. As a warden, McAndrew observed how correctional staff often suppressed their reactions. The culture within corrections prioritized discipline and silence, leaving little room for emotional processing. Officers were expected to return to duty immediately, managing other inmates and routine operations as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. McAndrew acknowledged that this expectation created internal conflict, as staff were given no meaningful opportunity to decompress or seek support. Over time, McAndrew came to believe that the psychological toll on staff was underestimated and largely ignored. He described officers experiencing sleep disturbances, anxiety, and emotional withdrawal, sometimes years after leaving death row assignments. In his view, executions did not simply affect the condemned, they altered the lives of those tasked with enforcing the sentence. He argued that repeated exposure compounded the harm, making it harder for staff to separate professional duty from personal consequence. McAndrew's reflections also highlighted the burden of leadership. As warden, he was responsible for ensuring that procedures were followed while witnessing the effects on his officers. He later acknowledged that the emotional strain extended upward through the chain of command. Decision-makers were not immune to the consequences of overseeing death, even when shielded by authority and protocol. His testimony reinforces a broader reality echoed by guards, superintendents, and anonymous officers alike. Executions are not isolated events confined to a single room. They ripple outward, affecting everyone involved. McAndrew's experience illustrates how the system demands emotional resilience without adequately addressing the cost of maintaining it. Across death row units, execution chambers, and silent corridors, one truth remains consistent. The human cost of capital punishment extends beyond inmates and victims' families. Guards, officers, wardens, and execution teams carry memories that do not fade with the end of a shift. Their stories reveal a profession shaped by vigilance, restraint, and emotional endurance. Death row is often discussed in terms of justice and punishment, but rarely through the lens of those tasked with enforcing it. Behind every locked door and every final procedure are individuals who must live with what they have seen and done. Their experiences challenge the assumption that executions are purely procedural acts, showing instead that they leave lasting marks on everyone involved. The voices of men like Ron McAndrew, alongside anonymous guards and veteran officers, offer a rare glimpse into a world defined by silence and responsibility. Their testimonies do not seek sympathy or absolution. They document reality. And in doing so, they ask a question that lingers long after the lights dim and the doors close. What is the true cost of carrying out the ultimate sentence?
If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content.